Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Closer Look, the show dedicated to bringing you the facts. We ask the questions no one else will, and we get the answers that no one else can. I'm Arabina Apia. Thanks so much for joining us. The Bahamas has become a leading voice in the fight against climate change, but that leadership has come at a cost. Rising seas are threatening communities along the coastline, while stronger hurricanes are forcing families to rebuild their lives from nothing. Hurricane Dorian was a reckoning. Entire neighborhoods were wiped out. The cost of rebuilding overwhelmed the government, and for the first time, many Bahamians came face to face with the reality of what climate change could mean for our future. It's this lived experience that has propelled the Bahamas to the forefront of global climate advocacy. We lead because we have no choice. From demanding loss and damage funding to creating innovative climate finance solutions, the Bahamas is holding the world's biggest polluters accountable while fighting to protect our people, our culture, and the generations to come. Tonight, we'll examine what this leadership looks like in action and the steps being taken to safeguard the future of our nation. Stay tuned, because A Closer Look begins on the other side of the break. Welcome back. You're watching A Closer Look. I'm Arabina Apia. Thanks so much for tuning in. Tonight, we're examining the global state of climate action, the issues facing vulnerable nations like the Bahamas, and taking a look at how our country has emerged as a leader on the international stage. For more on this, we go to our ACL correspondent, Krishna Roll. Krishna?
Thanks, Arabina. As the Bahamas continues to tackle the issue of climate change, officials here at the Office of the Prime Minister want to remind you that it is a real issue and we all must do our part for change. Have you ever just thought that the summers in recent years seem hotter or that storms are much more severe? As climate officer in the Office of the Prime Minister, Melissa Ingram tells us, the changes to climate have happened over thousands of years, the direct result of human-induced causes at an accelerated rate.
Well, we are currently already seeing all of the impacts, a lot of the different effects that are coming from climate change. So we see intensified and increased hurricanes. We have increased or rising atmospheric temperatures, but also rising oceanic temperatures. And then we also have extreme weather events that are taking place. And so if we're not acting now or sooner than later, we will have parts of the world that become unlivable within a few decades, due to severe loss and damage.
And according to Ms. Ingram, multiple sectors could be seriously affected if there continues to be inaction. She shared what you can do as part of a bigger effort to combat climate change.
All persons should ensure that they are taking steps towards climate action. And that could be as simple as reducing your water usage at home, reducing your energy usage at home as well. So turning your lights off when you're leaving the room, turning your AC off, your fans off, when you're using the shower, taking shorter showers, or turning the water off in between brushing your teeth or doing the dishes, even getting outside, planting a tree, carpooling, going to work or going out to different events. There are many ways that climate action could be beneficial in contributing to the global fight.
As we continue to champion climate justice, remember to stay informed because this is also your fight. I'm Krishna Russell for A Closer Look.
Thanks so much, Krishna. Stay with us, ladies and gentlemen. A Closer Look will be back after this. This is BDC Living, where we bring your indoor and outdoor living dreams to life. And as the holidays roll in, you can give the gift of BDC with our selection of festive home decor, trinkets, and treasures to make your holidays even more festive. Visit any of our BDC Living locations today and let your dream decor journey begin with us. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Arabina Apia. You're watching A Closer Look. Thanks so much for tuning in tonight. As you've already heard, the Bahamas is not just fighting for survival in the face of climate change, it's leading the charge for innovative solutions. In this next story, our Jillian Gray explores the critical role of climate finance in building resilience and delves into how the Bahamas is navigating the challenges of limited external funding. Jillian?
Rabs, when it comes to mitigating the effects of climate change, climate financing has to be a part of that conversation. And the Bahamas has been a part of that conversation from the very beginning. From Grand Bahama in the north to Inagua in the south, the Bahamas is combating climate change head on. The Bahamas is at the forefront of creative solutions in climate financing, and this year at COP29 held the position of alternate on the Loss and Damage Fund board. During the conference, the Loss and Damage Fund received an additional $85 million, bringing the fund to a near $800 million. But with an estimated $500 billion price tag a year required to keep the fund operational, Rochelle Newbold emphasizes the importance of global collaboration to ensure its viability and rapid response during disasters.
Because of course, as you would know, when a hurricane hits, there's a massive need that goes out. There's a massive need for impouring of funding to address all sorts of issues: social, health, safety, environmental, and that costs money.
The Bahamas is also making waves with a groundbreaking Debt for Nature swap, which frees up $125 million for climate resilience initiatives. Newbold explains that the focus remains on adaptation to protect our communities and build climate resilience across the archipelago.
We can't change what's going to happen with the climate. The sea level is going to rise, the temperature is going to increase. It's important for us to get the nation prepared by adaptation means and by being more climate resilient in terms of how we utilize the finances that we have. So this would require not just for New Providence, because a lot of things tend to be a lot more Nassau-centric, but we need to move beyond New Providence to the entire archipelago to make sure that our family islands are ready and to make sure that our communities within New Providence, Grand Bahama, and Abaco, that they are ready.
But this fight isn't limited to the global stage. Here at home, the Bahamas is taking an all-hands-on-deck approach, from switching to renewable energy to transforming farming practices, all to make the Bahamas more resilient.
We encourage farmers to look for drought-resistant crops, but also look at water management to properly and sustainably manage your water supply using irrigation methods such as drip, where you use less water, but you can also store your fresh water that you may be able to get through the rainy season, but just properly managing the natural resources that we have and using it to improve your production.
So as you can see, it's not just talk. We're putting our money where our mouth is and creating real change for future generations. I'm Jillian Gray for A Closer Look. Back to you, Rabs.
Thanks so much, Jillian. But our conversation on climate change isn't over just yet. ACL correspondent Amber Arana takes on the journey of the digitization of records through the National Emissions Registry. Amber?
One of the major steps in the fight for climate justice is the National Emissions Registry. This was birthed out of the Climate Change and Carbon Markets Initiative Act in 2022. We spoke with Larissa Cartwright, a missions registrar at the National Missions Registry, who provided an insightful overview of the registry and its critical role in managing emissions data here in the Bahamas.
So the registry is a new and emerging unit. Its focus is on tracking, recording, and reporting on emission reduction initiatives throughout the Bahamas. We have a special focus on ensuring that Bahamians are aware of the importance of emission reductions. And so while the Bahamas does not contribute largely to greenhouse gas emissions, we are at the forefront of climate change. Fossil fuels contribute, greenhouse gases contribute to the intensity of hurricanes that we experience, and so we must be able to respond.
One of the goals from the Ministry of Energy and Transport is to reduce reliance on fossil fuels by 30% by 2030. Larissa speaks to the importance of the Bahamas making this declaration as it relates to climate change.
So the 30% by 2030 is a mandate that the country has set on an international stage. The country is a party to the UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And so we've committed in the international arena to lower our greenhouse gases. Again, that's major because we're a small island state. We aren't at the forefront of causing climate change, but we have the most to lose because of climate change. Larger nations are transitioning, right? We are going to see less ICE vehicles and we're transitioning more to EV, right? And so what does that mean for countries like the Bahamas? We import a lot of Japanese vehicles. They're ICE. They're going to be obsolete. And so if we don't want to receive the junk, if we want to be with the transition, we ourselves have to see, as the world is seeing, the need to trigger change.
I'm Amber Arana, back to you on the desk.
Stay with us. A closer look will be back after this.
Every season creates an opportunity for you to enjoy the comfort and security of your most valuable assets. Unfortunately, termites are common and very unwanted guests that never stop eating. With Struckum, you can enjoy the peace of mind as we protect your investment with our 3-year fumigation warranty. Struckum, #1 in pest control services.
Welcome back. I'm Arabina Apia, and you're watching A Closer Look. Thanks so much for tuning in. So, what will the Bahamas look like in 2050 if we fail to act decisively on climate change today? Preston Ferguson Jr. explores the potential impacts of rising sea levels, land loss, and the cascading effects on infrastructure and communities. Preston?
Thank you so much, Arabina. As the Bahamas looks towards 2050, the nation faces a future deeply impacted by climate change. From rising sea levels, land loss, eroding infrastructure, all of these factors can redefine the country's future as we know it. We got a chance to speak with Acting Director of the Department of Meteorology, Mr. Jeffrey Simmons.
Really, the Bahamas is one of the most vulnerable nations in the world when it comes to sea level rise, especially the small islands. We could look at places, and most of our islands losing significant amount of land mass within the next, say, by 2050 and even further into 2100, could be even more. In some islands, we could lose probably up to 15%, in some places up to 2100, up to 25+% of our land mass.
With most of the Bahamas' population living close to the coast, the challenges of rising seas affects us all. From Andros to New Providence and Grand Bahama, vital infrastructure like ports, roads, and homes face growing risks, highlighting the urgent need for action and adaptation, specifically those along coastal areas.
Where we are most vulnerable, especially in the coastal areas, okay, where we have a lot of development going on in the coastal area. In some instances, a lot of those development are what I call indiscriminate. They just happen and people just putting up places everywhere, docks and all of that. All of these things are what give rise to it. And as a result of that, people move into these areas and these people now put themselves in more danger. So, we need to be very careful in terms of how we build in our coastal, especially close to the sea. We have to be very careful of how we build and make sure that the structures we put there can really stand the test of time. We never used to see hurricanes 200 miles per hour. We see them almost consistently every year now. All of these are the evidence that climate change is real.
As the Bahamas faces the challenges of climate change, the nation has a unique opportunity to shape a resilient future. By adapting today through smarter infrastructure and strategic use of climate finance, the Bahamas can build a sustainable tomorrow. The path forward is clear, and with decisive action, the future can be bright. I'm Preston Ferguson Jr., reporting for a closer look.
The fight against climate change isn't just for today's leaders, it's for the next generation. In this special segment, we go back to ACL correspondent Amber Arner as she speaks with the Youth Climate Ambassador, Lashante Sampson, who shares a personal and inspiring message about championing climate change for the future. Her perspective is a powerful reminder of why this work matters and what's at stake for the generations to come.
Thanks, Rabs. Today we're going to be talking to Waynisha Saunders, one of our 2024-2025 Youth Climate Ambassadors. This young leader represented the Bahamas at the 4th SIDS Conference and COP29, advocating for sustainable policies and a brighter future.
I had an amazing experience at COP29. It was in Baku, Azerbaijan. That's on the other side of the world, so it did take some time to get there. Nonetheless, it was a blessing. I was a part of the Climate Youth Negotiator Program, so the first 3 days of COP, we did an extensive training on the negotiation process and how you speak publicly in the room and how you present yourself, how you handle the media. It was an amazing experience, and I would do it again. One thing that I did take away from the Climate Youth Negotiator Program is that we do need young people in the rooms, and that's why I was so privileged to be a part of the Bahamas delegation, and my ambassador and my co-ambassador and I, Javon Sands, we were following the global stock take, which is basically just focusing on the progression, on how we're progressing globally when it comes to these goals, staying under 1.5 degrees Celsius and all of the other global goals made in the Paris Agreement. So that was an amazing experience. We weren't lead negotiators, but we were in the rooms and we were seeing the negotiation process. And I do think in the next few years that we are going to be the next negotiators leading in this space.
Her work at COP29 and beyond reminds us that young voices are vital in the fight against climate change. I'm Amber Arner reporting for a closer look. Back to you, Rabs.
When we return, we're joined in studio by our very special guests for more conversations on climate change. You don't want to miss it, so stay tuned.
This is the National Youth Guard program designed to train young people to help the Bahama Islands in times of disaster.
I decided to join to better serve my country as well as to better myself.
We train the help in search and rescue,
electrical, plumbing, and carpentry.
And things that they can actually expand on in their careers.
Young people who join the Youth Guard program discover a sense of identity, a sense of purpose, and a sense of patriotism.
This program isn't about only the individuals. It is about the country.
Welcome back, everyone. You're watching A Closer Look. I'm Rabina Apia, and this is our climate change episode. Joining me now in studio is Dr. Rochelle Newbold, who is the Special Advisor on Climate Change and Environmental Matters and the Director of the Climate Change Advisory Unit, and also Mr. Charles Hamilton, who is an advisor for climate change as well. Welcome to the show.
Good day.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. So let's jump right into our conversation. Today we've been talking all things climate change. So COP29 just wrapped. I know that, you were both able to attend, and it's a pivotal conference in terms of what the Bahamas is trying to do in the fight against climate change and the work that we're doing toward climate justice. Can you give us an overview, some of the key takeaways coming out of COP29?
So COP29 in Azerbaijan, Baku, was centered around climate finance. That was one of the key things that most of the countries wanted to make sure that the agreement that would be reached by 2030 would be one that we felt would assist us in dealing with the impacts of climate change. The whole structure of the UNFCCC as it relates to climate finance is that there is an agreement between developed countries and the level of support that they would provide to developing countries. So one of the key takeaways from that was what was the extent of the movement of that needle to make sure that developing countries were able to receive the financial support to deal with the impacts that they would be suffering in the coming years.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Hamilton, I know that the Prime Minister has made climate change and the sort of fight for climate justice a very important part of what he is attempting to do under this administration. Why is that important, and why should Bahamians actually be looking into, the impact of climate change on the Bahamas and what that means for our future?
Yes, well, ultimately, climate change is a real issue. We see it from the heat waves that we're having within country to the superstorms that have been traveling throughout the region and, creating havoc and wreckage to our colleagues to the south and also to our neighbors to the north with Helene and Milton. And so it's really important that the Bahamas remains at the forefront of this climate justice fight, because if we are not at the table, then we get left out in the narrative. We have people to feed. We have infrastructure to upkeep. We have our culture and our livelihoods to protect. And so being at that table, advocating for the climate-related resources and for the technology and for the capacity building is all critical. And the government has been really intentional about that. And the Prime Minister has been seen as a strong advocate, which has really helped to draw projects and partners to the country to assist us and ensure that at the end of the day, the Bahamian people benefit.
Dr. Newbold, I want to bring it back to you because you talked about the importance of securing financing in this fight. How does what happened at COP align with what the government is doing locally and regionally in this fight?
So what had happened with respect to the finance portion, all the developing countries create and report on their documentation that to draw a signal to how much money is required. The figure that was reached was that they would need $1.3 trillion. That includes the Bahamas. And when you look at that 1.3 in relation to Dorian causing us 3.4 billion, and that was one storm, just one storm. And the expectation that if we don't change our habits as it relates to greenhouse gas emissions, we will be seeing repetitive storms of a Dorian-like strength, right? The $1.3 trillion was a global target that was to be reached. And our developed partners were supposed to come to the table to negotiate how they would be able to support us in that downfall. Because small island developing states like ours can no longer borrow to address these damages. We were fortunate this year that we did not have any storms, but our colleagues to the south were not so fortunate. Beryl wreaked havoc. Grenada just installed a massive solar renewable program in country to address their removal from fossil fuels to solar. Beryl took it all out in one day, millions of dollars down the drain, and you have to start over. This is the situation that all island states face. We do not have the fiscal space to rebuild and repair and rebuild and repair every time a hurricane comes around. So being there in Baku to meet face to face with our partners, to talk about what it is that we're going to be needing, to determine how these funds were going to be made available, because the reality is also that our partners are facing impacts of climate change as well. So we can't operate in a bubble like they're not feeling the pinch, because they are. So we have to negotiate a space that's equitable to both parties. So we left Baku with an agreement of $300 billion to be provided per year up until 2035. Okay. Now, we were not happy with that figure, because $300 billion in comparison to $1.3 trillion, that's not even a drop in the bucket. And we're talking about more than 70 plus countries who are trying to gain access to those funding. So we did not get what we had hoped for, but what we were able to do was to meet with the partners, deal with the situation, and find ways and means as to how we can come back to the table again to address the true concern of the financial support that's going to be needed.
I think that the agreement to $300 billion with the ICJ trial coming up, I think is a good thing for the Bahamas and other developing countries, because it's showing that there have been historical contributions to climate change, and that the cost for developing countries like ours is vast, 1.3 trillion in total. But we're being told 300 billion is what will be allowed. And so clearly that's climate injustice. You're signaling to the world that climate inaction is acceptable.
Yeah.
It's signaling to the world that there are acceptable casualties. And in the case of talking about climate justice, I believe that the Bahamas and other developing countries will have a very strong case in terms of putting forward this injustice, just most recently seen, right, at COP29. Now, we do know that there is additional negotiation to happen into COP30 because it said, okay, this is what the 300 billion is here. Clearly, we need some more time to talk about what adaptation financing and other financial support is needed going into COP30. However, I believe that the Bahamas and other developing countries should really leverage this opportunity to say, we're being ambitious with our climate action plans. We're investing public funds. We're investing in having the shift in our systems, but you're not helping to meet us halfway as a partner in good faith. But it also requires for developed countries, to do their part. We can get a good outcome at the ICJ, but we also need people to follow up and pay. And that's going to be the next step.
I want to thank you both so much for being here, for having this conversation, because I think it's a very important one. And I know it's happening slowly, but many Bahamians are starting to see the importance. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
When we return, we have more of a closer look coming up right after this, so stay tuned. Tonight, we've explored how climate change is reshaping life in the Bahamas and why our leadership in the global climate fight is just not necessary, it's essential. This crisis feels personal, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Through the innovative strategies and bold action, the Bahamas is charting a path forward, balancing the urgent need to protect our environment with the realities of building a sustainable future. These efforts are a testament to our government's commitment to ensuring that our islands, our people, and our culture can survive and thrive despite the challenges ahead. As we continue to demand accountability on the global stage and advocate for climate justice, it's clear that this fight is not just about survival, but it's about creating opportunities and safeguarding the legacy we hope to leave for Bahamians in the future. I'm Rabina Apia, and I'll be back next week with a closer look at the stories grabbing headlines and sparking conversations around the country. Till next time, everyone, good night.